Hello there. Welcome to Stamp Along with Rubbernecker. This is Preeti. A very happy new year to all of you. This is the first card video for 2021. Actually, this is not a card video. This video is more about stamping basics for those of you who might be starting the art of stamping this year, or even for people who've been stamping for a long time. I am going to talk about the basics like the stamps and dies, papers, inks, etc. What you should have, and if you are a beginner, what you should know about these products, and what are some good things to have in your stash as you start this journey. So let's start off with stamps first. Most of us who start the stamping journey acquire stamps as the first possession. So, keeping that in mind, here's what I would like you to know is there are two different kinds of stamps in the market. One is the red rubber stamp, which I'm showing you right there, and the other one is the clear stamps, and both of these are available in the Rubbernecker store. Now, there's a few differences in a rubber stamp as well as a clear stamp. As you can see, a red rubber stamp is made out of red rubber. It's rubber, it's not acrylic, unlike the clear stamps. So the advantage, and these things have been in the market for many years, even before the clear stamps. Clear stamps are fairly new than the rubber stamps itself, and these have been there for a long time, and people use that a lot mainly because they're quite crisp, they take in ink very well, and they last long period of time. Now, keeping that in mind doesn't mean these clear stamps don't work as well. They do work beautifully like the rubber stamp. They do need a little bit of care because they are a gentle or delicate than a rubber stamp would be. So to the word, as I said, they're clear stamps. So that means to say you can see them, and when you position them on your stamping block, you can clearly see where you can place them. Most of the clear stamps will require a bit of priming, and the reason for that is because when these are manufactured, there's always a little bit of oily residue from the acrylic that remains on the stamp. So the easy way to fix it is when you get your new stamp is just take an eraser and go over it, and that should just take away the oiliness from it, and that should be enough for you for the ink to take in. And you can see these are my stamps. These are pretty new set, but because they take in that ink so well, your stamps do get a little discolored. Now, discoloration doesn't mean bad, it actually means good. That means to say your acrylic stamps are really working very well. There are the different kinds of stamp designs. So the one that I'm showing you is called the line designs. That means to say you can add color to those images after you stamp it. This here is called the layering stamp, which means to say you can layer these stamps using different inks to create beautiful florals without adding color or without applying color with coloring mediums. And as we progress along, I'm going to talk about inks and stuff like that. What are some good collection of stamps that you should have in your stash? I would highly recommend having some good sentiment stamp, and Rubbernecker has some beautiful, beautiful sentiment stamps in the store. I mean, they're really, really fantastic sentiments, and it's nice to have some thank you sentiments and stuff like that. And that's all about the stamps at this point that you should know. Next, let's talk about tools. What are some tools that you should invest in, whether you are a beginner stamper or you've been stamping? And these are some things you should have. First is paper trimmer. Now, there are multiple kinds of paper trimmers out there in the market. The one that I'm showing you is a guillotine cutter. This one is just a Fiskars paper trimmer, and it has a wire in it which shows you exactly where the blade is going to go. I like this one, but I don't use it very often is because it doesn't cut papers in different lengths. Now, if you are a first-time stamper and you're interested in buying something, this is a good paper trimmer to invest in. This is by Fiskars, and the good thing about it is it has a ruler which extends out, which makes it easy for you to cut the cardstock to the note card size. Now, there are two different note card sizes. That is a very common one. So when you take a 8.5 by 11 cardstock and you cut it halfway point, that is at 5.5, you will get a side folding note card. And then when you take the same 8.5 by 11 cardstock and you cut it lengthwise, you at a 4.25, you get a top folding note card. And I'll show you as we progress along. As you say, as you see, I'm showing you how to fold it, how these cards would look eventually. And you can see that that ruler goes up to 14 inches. So you get a lot of measurements in this particular paper trimmer. So it's nice to have one paper trimmer that can cut various measurements. The second thing is stamping blocks. There are acrylic stamping blocks like the clear ones that I'm showing you right here, and they come in different sizes. A good way to collect them is maybe 2 or 3 smaller sizes, a medium size, and maybe one long one for your sentiment. And you can see the Rubbernecker stamps, even the rubber stamps, they don't have the wood blocks like we are used to seeing in the past, the rubber stamps with wood blocks, but they have actually a cling back, which makes it easy for you to adhere even on a block, and it's easy to stamp because it's not on wood block. And that's one of the kind of stamping block or stamping blocks. The second kind is this one. It's called the stamping tool. This is called the Misty, and these come in various sizes as well. I do have the mini and the original. Now, if you were to invest on one of these, then the best one to invest would be the original, the one that I'm showing you right now, because this will fit all sizes of paper. Like here, the one, remember, we cut a cardstock into half, and you can see that entire cardstock sits into that original Misty very well. That means to say you can do multiple images stamped at the same time. Now, as beginner stampers or even as seasoned stampers like me, for example, every time I stamp, sometimes I miss it. So keeping the stamp in the Misty, you can always restamp again without losing the position. The next tool that you should have is scissors, a good scissor. I have lots of scissors. You don't need all of them. You just need a few. This one here is a fine detail scissor. It's a very sharp, thin-nosed scissor. And I use this mainly for fussy cutting images if I'm into fussy cutting. And then I also keep one of this is like a Teflon coating kind of a scissor, and I keep this mainly for cutting foam adhesives and any kind of adhesive things, because I don't like to gunk up my detail scissors for if I'm using glue. And this third one that I'm showing you, this is a very agronomical scissor. It's good for people who have arthritis or get pain in their wrist because of carpal tunnel or something like that. This is a good scissor. I do use this quite often as well if I want to do a lot of fussy cutting. And so these are some good scissors that you should have in your stock, whether you're beginner or you have been stamping for long. Next up is adhesives. So there are two different kinds of adhesives. I mean, there are multiple kinds of adhesives, of course. Again, the two that I would highly recommend is a foam adhesive and liquid adhesive. When you purchase liquid adhesive, make sure it dries clear. So that means to say if there is a oozing or anything, you don't see the glue because it dries clear and matte. And the second one is foam adhesive. This one is from Amazon. It's from 3M. And it's a very thin foam adhesive, and it's really nice if you like adding dimensions to your projects. And I love adding dimensions, so I add a lot of adhesive. These can be quite expensive and pricey, but there is a substitute for this in the market. If you go to any craft stores, Hobby Lobby, Michael's, whatever is there in your store, and you can buy foam, like fun foams that kids use for projects, and they're so cheap. I think each sheet is 25 cents, sometimes 90 cents, I don't know, but you can buy them a lot. Some of them even come with an adhesive backing, and you can replace that for foam. So that is a good substitute. The next tool one should have in their stash is the heat tool. Now, the heat gun is used to emboss the embossing powder, which we'll talk about in the neck in a few in a while now about what embossing powder is. So that's a tool that you use. The next good tool to have is a scoring board and a Teflon bone folder. This helps you to score your cardstock in different sizes, so that you don't get those cracked lines. So if you were to score cardstock, sometimes you get those cracked lines, but when you score them using your scoreboard, and also scoreboard helps you to score exactly where you want it to score, so that makes it easier. And again, it helps from not cracking your cardstock when you're scoring. And there are different measurements on the scoring board. If you're new to it, you will learn that you can make different interactive cards using the scoreboard. And a good one to have in your stash is a mini scoreboard. That's a really good investment. There are different sizes of scoreboards as well, but a mini scoreboard will be a good one. And the one that I'm scoring with is called a Teflon bone folder. Just so you know, if you are new to this, a standard card size is 5.25 by 4.25. That's what everybody makes. There are 5 by 7. There are other sizes as well, but that is the standard size. The next tool that one should have is a die cutting machine, because die cuts are very popular in the card making industry. Especially Rubbernecker carries beautiful, beautiful die cuts, dies, and I'll show you as to what are some dies that you should have as a beginner stamper in your stash eventually. But this is just a basic die cutting machine, and there are electronic ones too, and you can definitely use those as well. But a good simple die cutting machine should do. Moving on, because we looked at the die cutting machine. So what you do with the die cutting machine is you cut these dies, and these are all the different dies that Rubbernecker has, and they have many more. So there are different kinds of dies. One is coordinating die, like this one that I'm showing you. What it means is it coordinates with the stamp set. So when you're done stamping your image, you take your die and you die cut, like I'm showing you there, you just die cut those images along with that die, and you can create beautiful 3D florals for your card. And then there are standalone dies. Now, you don't have to go out and buy everything that is out there, but good collection, the starting point for a beginner stamper, are basic standalone dies, like the nesting dies, like the rectangle or the circle, or even ones with some stitching on it. And they add so much character to your um, to your cards that you make. And Rubbernecker carries a lot of these beautiful nesting dies in the shop. So there are rectangles, triangles, there are banners, and there are different kinds of stitching lines, dotted lines. Uh, I think it's a scalloped, and there's so many of them. It's, I mean, like this one right here has a cross stitch on the edge of the die. So as I said, it's nice to have basic dies, and the basic dies are just some rectangles and circles, and they do come handy when you're crafting. And then, of course, there is the slimline long dies, which is a newer trend in card making size, which is a 3.5 by 9.25 size card stock, and this slimline triangle die or rectangle die is perfect for that. And there are a bunch of different styles in the store, but as a beginner, this is a good starting point for you to have. Um, and I'll put the link to the store at the bottom, so you can just definitely go and check out the different kinds of dies that they carry. The next up is papers. Let's talk about papers. So, as beginners, there are three papers that I would really recommend you should have in your stock. One is a black cardstock, and the other one is there are two different kinds of white cardstocks. One is an 80 pound, and another is a 110 pound. And I'll tell you, I use them both very often. A 110 pound is a very thick cardstock, and then an 80 pound is a little bit lighter. This one right here is I want to say this is an 80 pound that I'm showing. So usually I use a 80 pound for adding, for doing some coloring, or the top panel, like this card that I'm showing you right here. The base of the note card is a 110 cardstock, and the top panel on which I've done the stamping is the 80 pound cardstock. And the 80 pound makes it easier for you to stamp and color on it. And if you were to fussy cut as well, an 80 pound is easy to fussy cut than a 110 pound. Now you would ask me, then why can't I make the card base with the 80 pound itself? Of course you can, but I like to keep my card base nice and sturdy, mainly because my card panel, the top panel, I tend to use a lot of foam adhesive and coloring and etc. etc. So I don't, and it sometimes when you add so much of everything, papers do warp and buckle, and you don't want to put it on another lighter cardstock, which does not help it to remain sturdy. And that's the reason why I like using 110 pounds. And 110 pounds gives that really luxurious feel to your card. Again, that's personal preference, but if you were to ask me if that's something that I should invest in as a beginner stamper, yes, don't buy a whole lot of 110 pounds. Buy a few and keep it in your stash and use it sparingly depending upon the kind of card you're making. And a black cardstock is good when you're doing sentiment and embossing and things like that. It's a basic neutral color. Like here, I'm showing you, I've embossed a sentiment on a black cardstock using white embossing powder, which I'll show you next coming up, what embossing powders are and how and what are some embossing powders you should have in your stash. So these are some good starting points, starting place to invest on papers. And of course, there are colored cardstocks, there are designer papers and things like that. But if you are a beginner, or if you're someone who's thinking, okay, what are something that I really need to keep a lot of, then these are the three cardstocks you should always have in your stash. Next up, let's talk about embossing powder. Embossing powder is a fine powder when heated with the heat gun, melts and gives a beautiful shiny embossed effect. Now, not all embossing powder are shiny. There are some that are matted. There are three embossing powders that I would recommend all of you have in your stash, whether beginner or not, is the white, the gold, and the clear. These three guys will take you a long way. I am not a big fan of a black embossing powder. I love clear embossing powder over black ink, and that's the reason why I like to keep a clear embossing powder. And that I'm showing you is the embossed, white embossed on that black that I did for that card. And I like to keep them in containers like that, so it's easy for me to put a spoon in it so I can scoop them and put them on my project whenever I need them. So as I said, these are the three basic things that embossing powders. And the next one that you should have if you're doing embossing is the stamping body tool, which is just a powder that takes away any static from your cardstock because of your oiliness of your hand, so that the powder, when you put the powder on it, it will stick in the place that you want it to stick. And how do these embossing powders stick onto the cardstock would be your next question if you're new to card making. Then there is an ink called the embossing ink. That's what you would use, and we'll talk about inks very soon. So you prepare your paper with that powder. Some people also use baby powder, if and I think that works well too. And then this is an embossing ink that you use to stick that powder on. And we'll talk about inks in the next step. So definitely, if you are going to emboss, when I started card making, it was the embossing that really attracted me. I even today I love to see the heat gun melting the embossing powder and the beautiful image coming up. So yes, if you do love embossing, you must have an embossing gun, an embossing ink pad, few embossing colors that I showed you, powder colors that I showed you, and the embossing buddy. And if you don't want the embossing buddy, of course, as I said, you can try using baby powder, and some people have also used cornstarch. Next, let's talk about inks. Again, what are some inks that you should have? The three inks that you should have in your stock is definitely the VersaFine or any kind of embossing ink, a Memento Tuxedo ink. Now, this is a dye ink which is very good if you are going to do alcohol marker coloring. Now, that's what we're going to talk about next, what coloring mediums are. So, if you're going to use alcohol markers, any kind of alcohol markers, if you've heard of Copics or you've heard of Arteza, any of those inks, that is a good ink. And the last ink that you should have is a good black pigment ink, which is crisp and it is really black. When you're stamping your sentiments or anything that you want to stamp, which you want to look crisp and black, that's a good ink to use. Now, that ink you cannot use with alcohol markers. This is a good ink if you want to do watercoloring or you want to do any other form, mediums of coloring. That's a good one, except alcohol inks. Keep that in mind. The next one are color inks, and these are called the color fuse inks, and these come in a pack of 4. They're already well paired. Remember, I was talking to you about the layering dies, like the layering stamps earlier. This stamp right here, you can easily use these colors. They're already pre-matched for you. So all you need to do is stamp each of those layers with with these inks to create beautiful layered flowers. So you'll start off from the lightest to the darkest. And each of this layering stamp set comes with a layering guide and the ink combinations that you could use for creating this beautiful flower. And there are lots of layering stamps in the Rubbernecker store. As I said, I will put the link to the Rubbernecker store at the description box below, and you can really look at some beautiful, beautiful little layering stamps that are available in the store. And if you don't like coloring much, this is a good way to make your cards pop by using layering stamps and these beautiful color fuse inks. Now, these color fuse inks are pigment inks, so you can use them to do watercoloring. If you stamp lined colors, lined images, you can easily do watercoloring. Here I'm showing you how beautiful the blues looking blue flower layered flowers looking on it, and they do come in other colors. I'm just showing you some primary colors. It's a good start to have primary colors like a yellow, a blue, and a red, but there are many more color packages in the Rubbernecker store that you can buy on, and they're a good size and easy to store, and I really, really love these inks. So these are some basic inks, as we talked about, that one should have in their stock. So the color fuse ink, a good black pigment ink, a memento tuxedo ink if you are into alcohol markers or any of those kind of markers, and the third one is the VersaFine or any embossing ink that's out there. Next, let's talk about coloring mediums. Now, there are multiple kinds of coloring mediums here, and I can do an entire class on just coloring mediums. But just to keep this simple, we're going to talk about just 3 basic coloring mediums. One is the alcohol coloring mediums. The next one is watercolor. And finally, the last one that I am talking about here is pencils, color pencils. When it comes to alcohol markers, there is Copic markers, which is the most commonly used coloring medium among the art crafters or card makers. And again, this is the only ink that is good with Copic markers, and they work beautifully. You don't smudge black ink anywhere. And Copic markers as a beginner stamper can be a little pricey. They do start from anywhere between $5 to $7 each. And I've had these Copic markers for a long time. I started with a very small, stock, like maybe a box of 12 or something like that, and then I have grown my collection over the years as I have started playing with the colors and I've started understanding Copics better. That's how I've started. So don't go ahead and buy the entire collection if you're still new to this. Try it, play with it, understand it, and then add on to that collection is my advice. But if you're not sure about Copics, if you're not ready to invest on it and you still want to learn about alcohol markers, Arteza is another good alcohol markers for beginners, and their price point is very, very low, and it's affordable, really affordable. So that's a good place to start. The color pencils, again, they come in so many different varieties. Prismacolor pencils are one of the best in the industry when it comes to coloring, and there are other companies too which are really good, but for the price and the quality, these pencils are really good. So if you're interested in color pencils, then Prismacolor is a good. Watercolors, Rubbernecker carries this, what is this called? Oh my goodness, I'm not getting the name. It'll be in the description box below. Carries these beautiful watercolor palettes that are easy to use, and They are in the store, and you can use them with any kind of watercolor brushes. This is a fillable watercolor brush and then a regular watercolor brush, and these watercolor works really beautiful. um, if you are interested in watercolors. So that pretty much completed all our basics, stamping basics. I hope you enjoyed this class. If there's anything that I've missed, let me know. And if you're interested in more detailed classes like this, let me know. And I would love to make more of these like stamping basic classes or stamping one-on-one classes or videos, so you know more about these products. I hope you enjoyed it. Give us a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to our channel, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.